How you doing, everybody? Thank you very much. I'm Orlando Ruiz Jr., and welcome to another classic horror movie review. Number 12 in my classic horror movie review series for October 2023. Halloween is pretty much here, about a night away by now, and I'm very excited. Got my costume ready, candy bowl ready, been watching horror movies and mixing it up with some family Halloween movies all month long with the kids. They're all excited, and gonna go trick or treating as always. And of course, I have those movies that I set aside to watch every October. The one I'm talking about right now definitely being one of them, 1931's Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi in the title role. In the role of Dr. Abraham Van Helsing, we have Edward Van Sloan. This movie also co-stars Helen Chandler in the role of Mina. In the role of Jonathan Harker, we have David Manners. In the role of Dr. Seward, we have Herbert Bunston. In the role of Lucy, we have Frances Day. And this is a movie that a lot of people, I think, remember fondly as a great classic horror movie. It's definitely a very important and iconic horror film, has many memorable moments. From the time of this movie's release back in 1931, every now and then, vampire movies throughout the decades would add more onto the lore that we already know. But a lot of that classic vampire lore, as far as all those tropes that we see in countless movies, things about the stake through the heart, or the vampire having to retreat to his coffin before sunrise, or even the mirror thing, not being able to be seen in the mirror. A lot of that stuff originated in this 1931 classic Dracula film starring Bela Lugosi. And more and more every now and then you get more stuff throughout the years, like the whole garlic bit, or the bit about having to be invited to someone's home before they can enter the home. I think it's safe to say that 1931's version of Dracula, the Bela Lugosi version, is the Mac Daddy of all vampires, the granddaddy of the modern day vampire film. And an argument can be made that, it all started with 1922's Nosferatu, with the Max Schreck version of Dracula in that film. But that kind of version of Dracula to me is very far removed from Bela Lugosi's version, though I do consider it pretty much the same story because it is. The versions are just so different in just the look and the way they act and everything, and so because of that, I don't really consider Lugosi's Dracula to be the same character. I think that character is pretty much its own character, just in the same kind of story, basically. Bela Lugosi's Dracula is such a huge part of pop culture and horror that anybody that has played the role since him has tried to find ways to play the character differently, or just play the idea of a vampire in a different way, trying to distinguish themselves from his Dracula or his version of a vampire, because his version is so famous and by now embedded in horror iconography that you just can't get away from it. It's one of those timeless characters that no matter how old it is, people know Bela Lugosi's Dracula. Though this movie is one of the earliest film adaptations of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, this movie is very famous for not being very accurate to the source material. And anyone that's familiar with the book will see that in the first 10 minutes of the movie, when the story starts with Renfield's character being the one in Jonathan Harker's place, in which anybody that reads the book knows that John Harker is the one that goes to Castle Dracula in that part of the story where he's talking to him about Carfax Abbey, and the count invites him to his home, and he stays there for a night, and spooky things happen to that character that night. But yeah, in this version, it's a character switch with Renfield being in his place, and Dwight Frye in the role of Renfield is definitely a scene stealer. He's one of those actors that you're surprised when you see him change later on. It's a very kind of seamless change from just a normal guy to a guy that's completely mad. There are times in this movie when Dracula seems a little crazy, and Renfield kind of out crazies Dracula even in his own movie. That's how good Dwight Frye is in this movie. And I'm really happy that they actually made a movie about the character that came out very recently with Nicolas Cage in the role of Dracula. I really enjoyed that movie and just the whole spin on that classic story. And the character of Renfield is definitely one that deserves more. So I'm glad that that character finally got his due with that very recent film. But as far as the character of Dracula goes, yeah, it's funny because in that film, which is titled Renfield, Dracula, played by Nick Cage, very much steals that movie. And I kind of feel it's the same with this original film from 1931, with Bela Lugosi being in the title role of Dracula, but ironically, Dwight Frye's Renfield steals this movie. When we meet Dwight Frye's Renfield at the very beginning of the film, as he gets off the carriage and tells the villagers that he's planning on going to Castle Dracula and staying the night there, they all look scared shitless for the guy. And there's a guy that tells him a bit of a warning about going, and he says, "No, I've got to go. Really, it'll be all right." And his acting is very good. The villagers' acting comes off a little cheesy, a little campy, even for the 1930s, I think, and kind of inadvertently funny in some of the line delivery there. As soon as Bela Lugosi appears in this movie on screen as Dracula, it's one line after another of classic Dracula lines, with him starting off with that classic "I am Dracula," and there's that great line of when the wolves are howling in the background, and he tells Renfield, "The children of the night, what music they make." And you hear different actors give their own little versions of these classic lines. Of course, there's that line, "The blood is the life," and one of my favorite scenes where he's offering Renfield, some booze, and he's like, "Are you gonna have some?" And he says, "No, I never drink wine." Because we all know what he really drinks. The very first moment that we see Dracula walking around on the streets of London after having just arrived, there's a scene where it's very foggy, and he comes out through the fog, and there's a woman standing there. He approaches slowly in his kind of pimp cape, very much on Mac Daddy Dracula mode, and then he gets really close and close, and of course it kind of cuts away. We don't see anything. Things like that are the kind of things that if you're a vampire fan with that bloodlust and you just want to see him sink his teeth into somebody, unfortunately you don't get any of that in this film. Everything as far as the kills are all implied. For a lot of horror movie fans, I know that's going to be a major turnoff, especially if you really appreciate a good blood sucking scene from a vampire movie. And given that this is the iconic Dracula, the granddaddy of vampires, it's kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest, when you watch those scenes. As a fan of vampires and all of that, you do want to see something. You want to see Dracula kind of just pounce on somebody. You want to see a bit of blood, something spurt, anything. Give me something. But you don't get that in this movie. If that kind of thing is kind of a deal breaker for you as a horror movie fan, and you were considering watching this movie but now not so much, I completely understand. As a horror fan myself, I kind of need those money shots every now and then. But what I really love about this film, besides the great performance from Bela Lugosi, is the overall story, the atmosphere, the costumes, even the lack of music. There's a serious lack of music throughout this movie, which some people would argue, kind of is something that hurts the movie. But I think in certain scenes, it's actually one of the things that makes certain moments of the movie slightly creepy. One of my favorite moments in this movie is a scene between Dracula and Van Helsing when there's a bit of a confrontation, and Dracula senses that Van Helsing is no fool, and Van Helsing definitely knows what's going on with Dracula and who he is, and takes a look in the mirror, sees he has no reflection, and even goes as far as to show it to Dracula, to the point where he violently smacks it out of his hands and onto the floor, and kind of trying to prove to the other people in the room that this guy is not who he says he is, basically. It's one of those great moments where both characters really understand each other. As far as the cinematography goes for this movie, for me, it's kind of a mixed bag. There are certain moments in the film where it looks like they were trying to achieve something with the camera, as far as giving you an experience and certain close-ups and moving the camera a little bit here and there. But for the most part, this movie can feel like a play in the way it was shot. There are many scenes of characters just standing in a room, the camera just on them from like this mid shot, and these kind of long takes where I can see certain people getting a little bored with this movie, especially if they're not used to classic 30s movies. And if you watch a lot of old films, you'll see that there are a lot of films that were shot in this way, and so if that could be a deterrent for some people for watching this film, I completely understand that. Because I do consider some of the performances and some of the acting in this movie as subpar, even to film standards of this time, I do give this movie 3 stars. This is a movie you can definitely find on streaming, with this being a Universal Pictures movie and Dracula being a part of the Universal Classic Monsters. And I'm sure this is a movie you can definitely find on streaming since it is a Universal Pictures film, Dracula being a part of the Universal Monsters legacy. And I think a lot of those can be found on Peacock, but if you want to get yourself a hard copy before they're all gone, I'm always saying this, you got to get these while you can, because pretty soon you won't be able to find any anymore. This is my copy of the Blu-ray of Dracula. As you can see there, that is Bela Lugosi in full pimp mode, trying to suck on some neck. 1931's Dracula is definitely a movie that is great for the spooky season of October. It's perfect for Halloween, and I highly recommend you guys check it out. Even if you're into classic movies or not, it's Dracula. It's one of the greats, so highly recommend it to you guys. Thank you all very much for watching this classic movie review. I very much appreciate it. If you're into this kind of thing, if you're into classic movies, please don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, please comment, share, like, and if you're a returning viewer, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your support. Till next time, see you very soon. Peace out and happy Halloween, everybody.